Rust on the Razor, Tom and Scott series, Book 6. Author, Mark Richard Zubero. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 3. The woman who'd confronted the sheriff was a foot shorter than I was. Her gray hair clung in tight curls to her forehead. She slipped a pair of gold-rimmed glasses from her face and let them dangle on a slender gold chain. "Thank you for your help," I said. She gave me a tight-lipped smile and turned to Scott. "I hope your father has a full recovery." She marched out of the restaurant. Louise returned with a tray filled with our orders. She placed each item on the table in rapid succession. "Who was that?" I asked Scott. "Clara Thornton." "Why did she intervene?" "I don't know." Louise leaned over and whispered, "She's the county commissioner. She doesn't like Sheriff Woodall." "Why not?" I asked. "I have to get my other orders." Louise fled. "County commissioner must be all-powerful," I said. "I wonder what hold she has on him." "Do you know her?" "Vaguely. I remember her husband more. He was the town pharmacist when I was a kid." "I hope we don't have trouble from Peter Woodall. You knew each other?" "Oh, yeah. Peter and I went through grade and high school together. We were close friends for many years. He was always at my house and stayed over a lot. He wanted a pro career as a football player, and if that didn't work, he'd take baseball. I thought he was pretty hot shit, but he didn't want to pay the price, do all the hard work. I thought he was a natural. And he did have a lot of talent, but he didn't get either career. Got himself elected sheriff a couple of elections ago." "Was he this big of an asshole as a kid?" "Aren't most kids assholes sometimes?" "I don't think I want whimsical philosophy. I want cheap, tawdry gossip." Scott ate a few bites of his breakfast and sipped at his orange juice. Finally he said, "The goofiest thing he and I did as kids was build a raft and try and cross Jefferson Swamp with it." "Why was that goofy?" "There's no current. The water just sits there. The only thing that happened was the damn raft kept sinking. Water isn't all that deep most places in the swamp, except when it rains. Lots of very unpleasant snakes, though." "Always wanted a snake-filled swamp in my neighborhood." "For weeks, this summer, we made our raft. We were filthy and muddy every day when we got home. I got used to sneaking in, changing clothes, and doing my own laundry to hide it from Mama. It seems kind of more innocent and wholesome than goofy. You ever spend hours chopping down anemic, innocent trees and trying to tie them together with scraps of rope stolen from your dad's barn?" "I led a swamp-deprived childhood. We built forts in a vacant lot." "Well, for 2 weeks, Peter and I had canteens filled with water that never lasted long enough. We had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that got soaked in vile swamp water every day because of our ineptitude. We had planned to sail on a great adventure. We never got 2 feet. Don't all kids make plans for great adventures or have wild dreams and fantasies?" "And what was yours?" I ate some of the warm and not overly greasy waffles and bacon. I glanced at my watch. Shouldn't we be getting back to the hospital?" "You're ashamed and embarrassed to say what you did." "I'm not ashamed and embarrassed." He grinned for the first time since his mother called. "This is Scott you're talking to." "I'm a little ashamed and embarrassed. I'll tell you later. I'm finished. Let's go." We walked back to the hospital. I was in a blue button-down shirt and khaki pants, both of which were wrinkled from wearing them overnight. Scott was in gray dress pants and a white shirt that also looked slept in. We both needed shaves, and I could have used a shower. I yawned. "We both need sleep," I said. "If your dad's okay, we better think about it." He nodded. At the hospital, the nurse told us there had been no change in his father's condition. We talked to Scott's sister and mom for a few minutes. Scott stopped in to see his dad. He came back out to say that he was sleeping peacefully. Since we'd been awake the longest, it was decided that we'd go get some sleep and come back early that afternoon. At that time, there would be a large family conference. Outside in the cloying heat, I asked, "Are we really going to stay at your parents' house?" Mama said it was okay. Why not? It's the house I grew up in. I always wanted to see that. He'd been to my parents' place millions of times. I wanted to know everything about where he grew up and what he did when he was a kid, memories and secrets about the person you love. Before today, I'd never had a chance to be in his hometown, and this could be my only one. Scott drove us out a 2-lane highway east of Bernard. "I thought you bought your mom and dad a new house in Wakalusa, Alabama." I did. Wascaloosa's Daddy's hometown. They didn't like it. They lived there a couple of years, then moved back to the old place. Shannon kept the old place exactly as it was. I paid for any improvements they asked for in the old house. It's got central air conditioning. That cost more to install than it would have to build them a whole new house. Air conditioning is a good thing. New plumbing and new electric, too. Tell me you didn't have to use an outhouse as a kid. I didn't have to use an outhouse as a kid. We passed a school complex, a 3-story red brick building with long rectangular windows, stood in the center of several acres. It looked like it had been there since the American Revolution. Several 1- and 2-story structures surrounded it, including a larger building with no windows, which I took to be a gymnasium. I saw a running track and a stadium open at both ends with 2 sets of concrete bleachers running along the longer sides. In the distance was a baseball field with lights and a small grandstand. I pointed. "Is that where you went to high school?" Grade school. Everything. That's the ball field I played on since I was a little kid. Under those stands was where 13 and 14-year-olds would sneak to smoke during lunch. Where did the older kids go? They had cars. The woods are more important things to do. I can still picture the first time I hit a home run on that field. You remember that? Absolutely. I must have been 12. I'm so scrawny. My uniform draped on my body. But you still had muscles. I was lucky. Tall and thin, but strong. It was after school on a Thursday, our first game of the season, against Eugenia Junior High School in Fillmore County. That's just south of here. We were losing about 15-1. I hit the ball just over the left field fence. Everybody cheered as if we'd won the game. Still lost by 10 runs. When did you start pitching and stop hitting? I always pitched, but when you're a kid and you're good, they try and get you to play all the time, even when it wasn't baseball season. I remember pitching and practicing for hours. We didn't have lights back then. We'd play until it got too black to see the ball. We tried flashlights once. Didn't work so well. He smiled. I'll never forget the time one of the other fathers got really mad because in one game when I was 14, I struck out all the other kids. Big, ugly old guy in bib overalls. Kind of a snaggletooth. He did not. Okay, no overalls. And no tooth. But the rest is true. I think he wore a white shirt and tie. Anyway, the guy said it wasn't fair and that I should have a handicap. My daddy and him got into a fist fight. Anybody get arrested or sued? That's not the way we settled arguments back then. It was just a fight. Only a couple of punches got thrown. The other guy had to be helped away. My daddy wasn't going to let some fool hurt his son's chances for fame. Must have been great being a star in a small town. I never thought about it much as a kid. I was so good from an early age. It's not arrogance. It's just some people are lucky enough to be born gifted athletes. The way that some people are real smart. I knew I was better, I guess. Stuff that was hard for other kids came easy for me. We were passing through mostly green countryside. Occasional patches of unwanted brown field testified to the drought the rain the night before had not relieved. This reminds me of the road to our place in Wisconsin, I said. Not real flat countryside. Lots of evergreen trees mixed in with the hardwoods. I guess it isn't much different, except for the lack of snow in the winter. Past a pig farm on the outskirts of town was a complex of gleaming buildings fronted by a red brick church with soaring steeple. Reverend Hollis's church, Scott said. I stared at the lush green lawn, even now being watered by sprinklers, scattered throughout the vast sward sloping to the road. It didn't look like fire and brimstone. We passed a trailer park. An old couple sat on a corroded aluminum chairs on a small slab in front of the first unit, facing the road. Their eyes followed our movement past, but I doubted if anything besides the second coming rolling directly in front of them would have gotten them to move. Dirt roads occasionally led off to the right or the left, despite the drought. Sometimes I glimpsed ponds of water standing in the distance. As we drove over a small rise, Scott said, "You can see the house. There, a little bit." I followed his finger to the left and saw a red roof amid green foliage. Minutes later, we pulled onto a dirt road that Scott took for a half-mile. Then he pulled onto a driveway that went maybe 50 feet to a clearing. The house was an unremarkable two-story, almost block-shaped affair. We parked on what I would have called the front lawn. After he turned the engine off, the first thing I noticed was the incredible quiet. You couldn't hear a passing car, train, or plane. I stood for a minute, taking in the morning heat, the totally green surroundings, and then began to pick out small noises. Birds in the trees, a dog barking some distance off, the wind as it brushed against the leaves. I could smell woods and dirt and freshness. One long porch ran along the entire front of the house. The screens looked new, and the flower print covers on the lawn furniture inside gleamed brightly. To the left, and 20 feet behind the house, was a barn. Past it were 3 smaller buildings that looked in need of repair. In the distance was a field of more than 5 acres, with lush green, something growing in it. Being from the Midwest, I recognized corn and wheat and, in a pinch, soybean. This wasn't any of them. I tapped Scott on the shoulder. "What's growing in that field? Molasses? Sorghum? Sugarcane? Okra?" "Drought doesn't seem to have affected it." "Sure looks good. Do your parents have irrigation? What is it?" Scott glanced that way for a second and said, "Weeds." "Who knew?" he said. "Don't need much irrigation in Georgia." To the right of the house, as you faced it, was a small orchard, which I presumed contained peach trees. I'd seen about 1,000,000 signs already advertising Georgia peaches. About 10 feet to the right of the house was a jumble of car parts surrounding an old Chevy pickup. Missing the windshield and a left front tire, next to it was a Toyota truck, sides dirt encrusted, but windshield intact and tires where they belonged. "You grew up here?" "I was born here." "Do you have a key?" "Mama and Daddy haven't ever locked up." We entered through the front door and stepped into a huge space that stretched the entire length of the right side of the house. Toward the front, it was a living room with a brown couch and unmatched chairs of varying kinds, all well stuffed and topped with doilies. Behind this was a massive dining room table made of thick wood and polished to a shine. 10 sturdy matching chairs surrounded it. An armoire and a chef-robe, both dark mahogany and highly polished, stood against the walls on either side of the table. Behind this was a gigantic kitchen. Doors to our left were closed. "Where's your room?" "Upstairs. All the kids slept up there. Mama and Daddy slept down here. Who'd want to be near all those kids?" We took our suitcases up with us. The stairs were wooden with a carpet running down the center. We passed down a hall to the last door on the left. I followed him in. 2 twin beds lay against opposite walls. Framed schedules from 4 high school baseball seasons hung on the wall above the bed in the left. Half the barn was visible through a window. On each side of the opening was framed pages of the Chicago papers from the days Scott won his World Series games. To the right of the door was a closet and 2 small dressers. "Who'd you share your room with?" Always somebody. Most of the time I had to share with Nathan, the youngest. You'll meet him later. He has the next farm over. Shannon is the only one who still lives at home. She has her own room up front. When we were kids, she and Mary shared one room, and Hiram and I shared another until Nathan was born. Where's the John? Door just to the right of the stairs. All of us had to share that. I can imagine the fights. And you would be right. I'm going to get some sleep. He stripped to his shorts and flopped onto the bed. On the left, the man can sleep anywhere. And this was the room he grew up in. I left my underwear on and sat on the bed on the right. I let my eyes rove over the interior. I was tired, but my curiosity was aroused. It was like getting a chance to learn the intimate little details of somebody's life you'd always been curious about, but never had gotten a chance to know. I pictured all the times he must have come home from school or from baseball practice, tossing his equipment in this corner or his clothes in the middle of the floor. I quickly corrected myself as I saw his neatly folded pants and carefully arranged shirt. He'd probably put everything away where it belonged. Then again, maybe he hadn't been a neatnik all his life. The small figures on the dresser closer to the door caught my attention. A set of miniature soldiers in Confederate uniforms. They stood, knelt, or lay in battle poses, guns thrust forward. No blue-coated figures opposed them. I picked one up. It was coolly metallic. Will you put that down? Lie down and go to sleep? I jumped at his voice, breaking the hush. The only sound I'd heard in the house was the minimal thrum of an expensive and well-installed air conditioning system. I turned to him. He hadn't raised his head. You're awful noisy, he said. I lay down and stared at the ceiling and surprised myself by drifting off to sleep. I awoke to find Scott's open suitcase on his bed. But no Scott. I pulled out clean underwear, another pair of pants, and a clean shirt from my suitcase. I threw on some socks and shoes and hurried downstairs. I found Scott putting out peanut butter and jelly and bread. All the appliances in the kitchen gleamed and sparkled. Besides 5 feet of counter space on either side of the stove and sink, there were a refrigerator and a freezer, 3 ovens, including a built-in microwave and a dishwasher. What time is it? I asked. We slept about 4 hours. It's a little after 1. How come some of this stuff is totally modern and a bunch of it looks like leftovers from before the Civil War? Daddy likes to keep the old stuff. Mama lets him pretty much, but she insists on having anything new that makes her work easier. Footsteps sounded outside the back door. It swung open a few moments later. A man who could have been Scott's twin, except for being maybe 5 or 6 years younger, raised blue eyes at us. Hello, Scott, he said. He took off work boots, opened a door that showed a washing machine inside, stuck the boots on a mat, and shut the door. Scott introduced us. This was Nathan. We shook hands. Any news on Daddy? Nathan asked. I called a few minutes ago. Still not good, but he's no worse. Nathan nodded. Y'all staying here? Yeah, Scott said. Nathan nodded. Again. Mama know that? Yes. Nathan nodded. If nodding non-committally were a virtue, Nathan would be a saint. You hate to make comments about in-laws, but maybe he didn't have a whole lot of other responses to the world. At least he didn't scream. Get out, you faggots. Always a plus. Nathan said, wanted to get some chores done today before I went in. Probably drive to the hospital this afternoon. You can come with us, Scott offered. Better take my own truck. Don't know what'll happen and who'll want to stay. He declined lunch and left the room. Minutes later, I heard water running. I could use a shower too, I said, after we ate. I climbed into the most ultra-modern shower I'd ever enjoyed. From the outside, this might be an old farmhouse, but inside, a lot of it was as up-to-date and well-appointed as any place I'd been in. We returned to the hospital an hour later. 6 carpenters and I listened to the doctor murmur uncertainties and theories. No one had said a word about my being there, and most often my presence was ignored. I said nothing during the discussions and did my best to fade into the background act. Scott and Shannon agreed to keep watch first, while Hiram, Nathan, and Mary took Mrs. Carpenter home to get some real sleep. Mary would return later. I found a comfortable place on a couch in the waiting room and finished the D'Amato book. If it hadn't been so good, I'd have gotten more of a nap. I woke at 7 and called into the CCU. No change in Mr. Carpenter's condition. Hiram showed up and replaced Shannon. Mary came down the hall. She had the same freckles Scott did along the bridge of her nose. She wore a minimum of makeup and wore her hair straight to the sides with a slight twist on the ends. After she checked on her dad, she asked, "Why don't we get dinner?" "Someplace besides the Waffle House," I said. She laughed. "I'll take you to Della's Barbecue. Best place in town. I had a long nap at Mama's and I could use a walk. I'll show you the town." It was 3 short blocks to the courthouse square. On the way, I explained what Clara Thornton had done at the Waffle House and asked what her story was. Old Clara's a dear. Her husband was county commissioner for ages way back when. Scott said he was the pharmacist. He did that part-time. The rest of the time he ran the county. "You mean there's a county commission like the one in Cobb County that was in the news for all that homophobic crap?" Not long before, Cobb County had passed an anti-gay ordinance. One commissioner's daughter had come out of the closet and opposed her father. Hadn't seemed to change his mind. I can't imagine a parent being in favor of denying their own kid basic rights. We don't have quite the same setup in Burr County. You may have read about the Supreme Court case a year or so ago. It said that Georgia counties could have a one-person form of government. Black people had sued, saying that type of government kept them from being represented. Didn't hear about it. In Burr County, it's sort of as if there was a president of the county, but with no legislature. Oh. Well, anyway, Clara's husband died, and all the good old boys couldn't agree among themselves who would be the commissioner until they could hold an election. They compromised on Clara, and she's gotten herself reelected twice now. They can't get rid of her. A new Southern woman? Only sort of. She actually does most of what the old guard would have wanted. She's been pretty sensible mostly, although she's had some problems. That incident with Peter Woodall wasn't the first. Normally in the South, we avoid any kind of confrontation, any open unpleasantness. We can see all we want, but if we keep our mouths shut and don't mention something, then it doesn't exist. At the very least, we don't mention it in public. I understand the concept of not scaring the horses, although that does sound hypocritical. We walked down the east side of the street, across from the courthouse. "I suppose it is, sort of," she said, "but it's the way we are. We'd rather not mention something." Sheriff didn't seem to mind being publicly nasty to us. "You broke a taboo. You were 2 guys holding hands in public." Scott was hurting. It was an innocent gesture. "You might as well have blasted a fanfare. You must have seen the headlines in the local papers." I nodded. "My brother is the biggest thing that's ever happened to this town. You can't imagine what it was like when he was a kid. Besides being a sports star, he was the most handsome and popular boy in town. He never let it go to his head, was always kind of shy. All the girls wanted to date him, and all the boys wanted to be his friend. People in town would give him stuff." "Give him stuff?" "Like free meals when he was out with a date." "He dated?" "Of course. He never told you?" "Only that he went out some. Every weekend dated the prettiest cheerleader for his entire senior year." "What was that like for you and your brothers and sister? Lots of jealousy?" "I loved it, but I'm his older sister. I could get more dates because of him. Sometimes we'd double date. He didn't like to show it, but he was smart too. But you know that. We'd have these long discussions, the kind kids have about their dreams. We'd sit on our porch on hot summer nights and talk for hours. Those are my favorite memories from childhood." "How about the younger kids?" "He brought so much positive attention to the family. I think everybody kind of reveled in it. Hiram tried to be like him. Nathan was sort of Scott's pet. Followed him around everywhere. Scott was the hero of the town's connection with fame and immortality, so When the news hit about you two, it hit big. Lots of people feel betrayed. Preachers mentioned it from several pulpits, from what I heard. So when I touched him, I knew before you got back to the hospital that you two guys had been holding hands. The only way two guys can hold hands in this town is if they're football players in a huddle in the stadium on Saturday night, and that's it. You struck a very tender nerve, and Peter and Scott go way back. I thought they were friends. But rivals, too. Scott didn't mention that. Scott is such a sweetheart. I don't think he notices a lot of stuff like that. He always wants to think the best of people. We walked past the Rexall drugstore, the first bank of Bernard Hardware, Bernard Autopods, and Nellie's Antiques. The sun was beginning to set, but heat radiated off the pavement. The long shadows seemed gentle. But there must be gay people in town, I said. But it isn't talked about. I've lived in Macon for years, so I don't know specifically about Bernard. I do know that if a man lives by himself, he is referred to as a bachelor. If he doesn't want to be hassled, he goes to Atlanta to have a relationship. Two women might be able to live together, but they'd be harassed on the streets by men trying to date them. The heterosexual southern male mind assumes a woman alone is theirs. That's not just in the South. If someone was gay in town, it simply would not be mentioned in polite society. Two men openly living together would be close to impossible. They'd have to lie or be closeted in some way. Makes horrible sense. The two-story courthouse sat in its square across the street from us. Immense trees shaded the red brick edifice. Is that a statue of a Confederate soldier? Mary followed my gaze. Every courthouse square in the South is one of those. Last night I saw the markers about Sherman's march through here. Burned most of the farms in the county. Wrecked the town, but didn't burn all of it. There's a story of a few of the local women attempting to hide with their valuables in a hollow down by the river, but they were found and lost everything. Most people fled. If you get time, you should visit the Historical Society. What happened to your farm? It was Mama's great-grandfather's back then. He'd gone off to war along with his brothers. Only one of them came back. The farm was burned to the ground. All the animals were stolen. Every bit of food was lost to the invaders. Do they still call it the War of Northern Aggression in schools? Scott told you that. Yeah. Not so much anymore. More years pass and more people move here from the north. The South does change. A woman in spike heels, a very short skirt, and a white see-through blouse approached us. Her eyes raked me from feet to head, lingering on my crotch. She hesitated as she neared me, gave me a warm smile, and walked on. Who was that? I asked. Violet Burnside, the cheerleader Scott dated his senior year. She wears that outfit quite well. Violet works hard on creating an impression. Della's barbecue was on the northeast corner of the square. We entered a dimly lit room with booths down the left side, tables in the middle, all set for 4 people, and the kitchen on the right. Almost every table was crammed with noisy revelers. Mary was greeted with friendly waves and expressions of concern for her parents. I felt eyes giving me cool appraisals. She introduced me. People smiled, but said little beyond what was required by politeness. Is there such a big crowd because of everybody going to the reunion? I asked. It's one of the big social events of the year. Most people will go. It'll be this big bash in the high school gym where too many people will get drunk, and some people will have happy memories. If your father is well enough for Scott to take some time away, I'd like to go to the reunion with Scott. She shook her head. I don't know if this town or any like it in the South is ready for that yet. The hostess seated us in a booth near the back. I wondered if this was accidental, but then decided I was getting paranoid. A ham hand landed on Mary's shoulder. The massive fist of bulging flesh belonged to an overweight man, about 5'8" in pink knit pants, a white belt, and a yellow shirt with the words Al's Bowling Alley, open every day, emblazoned across the front. His gleaming smile matched his outfit for brightness. Sorry about your dad, he said. Heard Scott's back in town. Mary thanked him for the sentiment and introduced me to Al Holcomb. He smiled ingratiatingly. He did not own the local used car dealership, as I'd suspected, but I was close. He owned an insurance agency. Al leaned over toward me and confided, I've been to college up in Kentucky. I'm not prejudiced like these other people. Don't like it when these homosexuals parade around, but I don't mind them as friends. I knew one in college. A nice guy. Did a great drag show. He was real popular. I kept myself from thanking him or hitting him. The waitress taking our order briefly stopped his largesse. When she was gone, he switched topics to talk cheerfully and at some length about how great it was that Mr. Carpenter was fully insured. Mary looked pained when Al started in awful as he got going. He seemed oblivious. Finally, I said, we need to eat and get back to the hospital. Perhaps later we can talk about it. After several glad hands and guffaws, he left. Who the hell was that? I asked quietly. Al is the head of the local Ku Klux Klan. I turned to get another look at him. I felt a shiver as I saw him sitting at a table with 4 children under the age of 12, and a woman in a polyester outfit in different shades of pink. He doesn't look frightening. How do you know he's the head of the Klan? We may all be too polite to mention things in public, but we all know each other's secrets. I discovered eating barbecue meat, having pork ribs smothered in a thick sauce. They were the best I'd ever eaten. When we finished dinner, we stood on the sidewalk outside Della's for a minute. Lights from store windows nudged at the night. A police car cruised past us slowly. Was that the sheriff? I asked. Mary squinted toward the car. Couldn't tell. The vehicle continued north and then pulled in front of a building with 3 other cop cars parked in front. 2 bright floodlights illuminated the parking lot. The building itself was 2.5 stories of dark red brick matching that of the courthouse. Across the street from where the car pulled to a halt was a squat beige brick building with barred windows on either side of the front door. I pointed. What's that? Burr County Jail, an eyesore. It looks like the kind of place where they had a lynching just last night. Hasn't been one of those in decades, she said. I stared at the building a few minutes. Beyond it, a sward of grass studded with enormous trees and soft streetlights sloped down to a small stream. Mary said, we better get back. It's always this humid, isn't it? I asked as we retraced our steps. It's usually worse. We haven't had a lot of rain this year. Don't hurricanes come through here? She laughed. We're too far from the coast. We get lots of rain, but we don't have to evacuate. Supposed to be a big storm coming in from the Gulf in the next 24 hours. Farmers are hoping. The hall outside the CCU was a bedlam of activity. Nathan and Shannon were near tears. Hiram talked anxiously into the phone. What's wrong? Mary asked. Is he... We aren't sure, Shannon said. They called and said to get here. They said he had another attack. We don't know what's happening. Minutes later, Scott appeared in the hallway. He addressed us all. Daddy's heart monitor went into an arrhythmia. He had more severe chest pains. They're going to do an angioplasty to try and clear any blockages. It could kill him, but if they don't do it, he'll probably die. Should we move him to a bigger hospital? Hiram asked. Burr County General has everything a big city hospital would have, Nathan said. It's a hick town with barely enough faculties, Shannon said. They looked at Scott, who looked at Mary. If he should have been moved, it's too late now, Scott said. Dr. McLarty is a heart specialist, Mary said. They put the hospital here so it could serve several counties. This one specializes in cardiac cases. The one 2 counties over has all the experts on diabetes. They divided it up like that all over this part of Georgia. An Atlanta hospital might be able to specialize in a lot of these, but we've got just as up-to-date heart faculties right here. It's the best one around. It's pointless to fight and second guess, Scott said. He's getting the best care. We'll just have to wait. The hours barely moved by. Fortunately, I'd brought Carolyn Hart's Dead Man's Island as a backup to the Diamato book. I barely looked up at the passing scene. Siblings paced. More cousins and in-laws appeared and disappeared. Scott insisted his mother lie down. After 9, Scott and I took a break outside the doors of the hospital. No traffic passed on the street. Bugs began to sample our skin. I told him about dinner and the party I'd seen and met. "You saw our old Violet?" he asked. "Yeah. You really dated her?" "For more than a year. I believe the polite term for her appearance would be voluptuous. She hasn't changed much. She was nice and smart, though. A lot of that was an act." "Did you..." I hesitated. "Did I what?" "You and Violet." I got a shot of blue-eyed amusement. "Do you really want to know?" I shrugged. "I guess not. Actually, I did, but some things are best left unsaid and probably unasked." We went back upstairs for more waiting. Around 11, I walked down to the food machines in the basement. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. It would take more time and give me a little exercise. As I strode down the silent corridor, I heard soft voices ahead, already at the machines. When I heard my name, I slowed down. I caught the middle of a conversation. "You mean Mama said they could stay in the house?" "That's what Scott said. I think his buddy slept in my old bed." "How can she let him bring that fag into the house?" "Somebody's going to have to talk to them." "Ooh, you're next to Scott in age." "But you were always closest to him. You were his pet. You're the youngest. He won't get mad at you. Or if he does, he won't hit you." "He wouldn't hit you anyway. You're big enough now to fight back." "I wouldn't want Mama to know we were fighting at a time like this. His hit me. Remember the time in high school?" "You were kids, and you did leave his favorite baseball mitt at the park, along with his lucky bat, and they both got stolen because of you." "How many times do I have to say it wasn't my fault?" "Scott blamed you and beat the shit out of me." "I thought Daddy was going to beat the shit out of him." "He didn't, though. He always did like Scott best." "Will you give it a rest? We have to decide what to do about him going around town with that faggot. Did you hear what happened at the Waffle House this morning?" "The whole county knows, and half the people between here and Atlanta. I wish the sheriff could run that queer out of town. I'd beat the shit out of him myself if I wasn't afraid of Scott." I decided I'd heard enough. I stepped back a few paces in the hall and then walked forward, making loud sounds with my feet. The voices stopped. I rounded the corner and smiled at Hiram and Nathan. Their bland faces revealed nothing about the mayhem they'd been contemplating. They said nothing as I inserted coins in the machine, punched my selection, and retrieved my RC Cola. I smiled at them and left. They kept silent as I walked away. Back upstairs, I read for a while and then began to doze when, around midnight, Scott whispered to the family who were there, "The doctor's back." I stood next to Scott as the family gathered in the hallway. Dr. McLarty took off his green cap and wiped his forehead. He spoke directly to Mrs. Carpenter. "The procedure itself was a success. We've cleared as much of any blockages as we could find. We still don't know the extent of the damage that has been done. We've done what we could, but we just won't know for a while. Time will have to pass. He is breathing on his own, which is good." "Can we see him?" Hiram asked. "You can sit up with him, but you can't speak with him. And only 2 at a time." "Mama?" Scott said. "I'll go," Mrs. Carpenter said. "You come with me, Scotty." The remaining brothers and sisters discussed their father until Scott and his mother returned half an hour later. "Mama should go home," Scott said quietly. Mrs. Carpenter looked gray and tired. She made no protest. "I'll take her," Mary said. They discussed familial logistics. It was unlikely Mr. Carpenter would awaken before morning. All of them were tired. But Scott insisted he wanted to stay. I volunteered to stick with him. Hiram and Shannon began to protest at that, but Mrs. Carpenter said, "I think that's a good idea, Scott, and Tom should stay. We'll all be fresher in the morning." "How'd your dad look?" I asked as we watched his family leave. He shook his head. "How are you holding up? You haven't had much sleep in the past few days." "I'm okay. I'm awfully glad you came with me." We re-entered his father's room. Scott sat next to the bed and held his dad's hand. I sat in a chair and read as the first hints of gray dawn appeared. Scott said, I want to stay here for a while. Can you go back to the house? Maybe get my shaving equipment, change of underwear? I just don't want to leave. You should get some sleep. I want to be here if he wakes up. I'll stay if you want. Bring me back that stuff, he said. I need you now as I never have before. We hugged. I could feel his tension as I held his shoulders. I'll be back as soon as I can, I said. You remember the way? Scott asked. As long as it's daylight, I should be okay. The turnoff from the highway is the first left after the second crumbling gas station. Yeah, and it's the third dirt road on the left. On the right. No nurse was on duty as I left the CCU. I walked down the muted and empty corridors, and this time took the elevator down. The hospital doors swung open automatically. I stood in the entrance for a few minutes, stretching my arms. I realized I'd left my book upstairs. I turned to go back, but then figured I'd be back in a while anyway. The air was damp and almost cool. Tendrils of fog drifted about 4 feet above my head. The nearly empty parking lot looked eerie, clear visibility at ground level, and then these wisps of fog, and then above them a dark sky to the west, but faint grays and the first blues off to the east. I ambled to the car. The lights in the parking lot flicked off. As I approached our rental, I saw a dark figure in the back seat of the car. Now what? I muttered. As I approached, the bulk didn't move. A few seconds later, I was close enough to recognize, despite the deep shadows, the grinning face of Peter Woodall, the sheriff. I unlocked the front door and flipped the lock for all the doors. An unpleasant odor mixed with the new car smell. I guessed it had something to do with the nearby forest swamps and farms. And I hadn't noticed it when I walked out of the hospital. Maybe the wind had changed. By the time I wrenched open the back door, I'd completely lost my temper. I don't know what the fuck you think you're doing, you son of a bitch. I've never done anything to you. I just want to be left alone. As soon as Scott's father is better, we're leaving. I wouldn't want to stay in your goddamn county anyway. Woodall just kept staring forward and grinning. Look, asshole, I continued. Maybe you've got some score to settle with Scott. Maybe you should fight a duel or do whatever it is macho guys do in the South. But why don't you leave us the hell alone until they can be arranged? He grinned some more. I leaned further in. Most of his body was shrouded in darkness. The odd smell was almost overwhelming. Look, shit for brains, maybe you can hide in the back seat of people's cars in this part of the county. But the grinning face slowly leaned toward me and then continued past my startled expression and slumped all the way over. I grabbed the body before it could fall out of the car. It was cold. The front of Woodall's shirt felt damp and sticky. Shit! I shifted his bulk so it was sitting up. The light was dim and I could still barely see. I looked at my hand. The sticky dampness I'd felt was blood. I lifted Woodall's head up to feel for the carotid artery, although I figured it was quite useless. I'd held dead bodies in the jungles of Vietnam, and this one felt just like those. Checking the carotid was indeed pointless. Moving his head gave me the cause of his death. His throat had been slit. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.